Welcome back to another episode of EpicEarth. EpicEarth is a podcast for those curious about the STEM fields and the awesome, quirky, and fun experiences and research that is taking place right now. This is episode number 10. Every little bit matters. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride as we take a journey around this epic Earth.
How are elements distributed in a planetary body?
What are our hopes? What are our dreams? What do we want to accomplish? And how do we accomplish it?
We can have all the science in the world, but if it's not translated, how is that helpful?
Welcome everyone to a brand new year of EpicEarth. With me, I have Brian Rosenblatt.
Hey there.
Sadly, we don't have Scott Gavain with us today. He had another commitment, but he's here with us in spirit, and I'm Ashley Bosa. And I'm super excited to introduce our guest for this podcast interview. Her name is Lisa Hecht. Hi, Lisa.
Delighted to be invited.
So we're so excited to have you. So Lisa is a semi-retired electrical engineer and program manager. She worked with HP for over 32 years, so she has a lot of experience with that. She also started a small business as an accredited career coach through the International Coaching Federation, which is something that you do now. Is that correct, Lisa?
Yes, on a part-time basis.
Great. And then she's also a founding member of the Idaho CleanTech Association and the Idaho Business for the Outdoors, which she can explain a little bit more about what those are to us here in a little bit. And then if that wasn't enough, she's also been an Idaho state organizer for the Union of Concerned Scientists, which is something that I work with Lisa on now. And she's also a member of organizations like the Citizens Climate Lobby and some other environmental groups in Idaho, which do a lot for basically a great deal to help with our environment and keep it clean and usable and enjoyable for everyone. So welcome, Lisa.
Again, I'm delighted to be invited, and it's the Idaho CleanTech Alliance.
Okay, that's good to know. So Lisa, let's just start out. Well, tell us a little bit about who you are. What makes Lisa Lisa?
Well, I think curiosity drives a lot of what I do. And that's what I love about science. I remember being a little girl who was watching the ants and their social organization in the anthills. And my mom was like, "Where's Lisa?" And she found me doing scientific research on an anthill or observing the crows and the birds in our backyard. And then I also always loved the stars at night and astronomy. So I think curiosity that drives up so much of science is a big part of it. And also my background as a Girl Scout, the idea that we can and want to leave every place cleaner than we found it and better than we found it. So I think that sense of science and community, I hope they come together in me. That's my wish, my goal.
I really like how you mentioned your curiosity at an early age, because that seems to be the general trend, is just being curious at an early age. And you do your own little scientific method as a little kid, trying to discover things in your own way. And that's usually how it starts for most people. So
yeah, I have to mention one other thing. My parents gave me this really cool golden book called The Moon. And I would memorize little facts like the apogee and the perigee. I think the perigee of the moon's orbit was like 239,000 miles. And the book was so cool, and it just really got me into astronomy. So, and the other last thing I'll mention is I'm super impressed with the quote by Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist. He says, "The scientific method is the best means we've ever found to get at the truth." And I love that because, I don't want to be partisan. I just want to, I want us to meet in the middle where the truth is.
Yeah, I think that's so legit and so valid. Yeah, he's such a great person, and I love reading a lot of his books. Um, yeah, that's great, Lisa. It's interesting because, yeah, as Brian said, so many of us have this innate curiosity about the world around us, whether that's through nature or through the lab or through, politics. And some people look at human condition and just, what goes on with how we think about the world. And I think that's what draws so many of us into these scientific fields and to the STEM fields, really. And so I want to get more into your background as an electrical engineer, because I think your story is really interesting.
Okay.
So can you just tell us a little bit about how you got into electrical engineering and sort of your story behind all of that?
Yes. Well, there's a bunch of, first of all of us get where we are because of other people. None of us, does it all by ourselves. So my father used to give us little puzzles out of Scientific American when we were kids, and I loved solving them. So math and science and logic for me were fun. I didn't have this math anxiety that so many girls have. It's like nobody told me I couldn't do it, and I loved it. And then in high school, I went to a Catholic high school, and my teacher, Sister Jean Fristel, bless her heart, encouraged me, and I really got me excited about physics. Chemistry was okay, but physics was totally way awesome. And and when I was in junior high, she found out about a workshop called Women in Engineering, which was up in Michigan Technological University, and it was a 2-week camp where young women could learn about science. And I didn't even know engineering was a profession, or as we say now, it was a thing. There were no engineers in my immediate family. But I went up there and I saw women who were engineers, and there was a chemical engineer, an electrical engineer, and a mechanical, and a civil engineer. And they would show us and tell us what they did, and then we would do little exercises. And I came away from that and I said, I want to be an electrical engineer. And that kind of was where I made the decision. And as I said, nobody told me I couldn't. And so I signed up and did the courses and loved it and got my degree and started working for Hewlett Packard.
So none of your family had a scientific background?
No, not my dad, not my mom. My dad was he taught business math, and my mom was a teacher. So she also had a role in, getting us interested in education, supporting all of our education. But no engineers in the family. So I was boldly going where no one in the family had gone before.
Awesome.
To quote something from the USS Enterprise.
That's really interesting. And I think boldly going where no one had gone before, Lisa, also a woman in the STEM field going into engineering. And how was that experience for you?
Well, I'll tell you, back in 1975, when the Earth was still cooling, it was really different from now. I mean, I remember being in this intro class with 300 people, and there were maybe 5 women, so I always kind of felt like I was in a fishbowl, and everyone was watching me. And so I just worked extra hard just to prove that, I could do it. My gender didn't make a difference in my ability. And so I just worked really hard and, to get those good grades.
Totally. And that's still prevalent today. I'm teaching 6 credits of physics labs this semester, and every single one of my classes is outnumbered boys to girls. So,
and I think we need to see faces like around, and we need cohorts, right? So I just read a really interesting article. I want to say Bloomberg, but I don't think that's right. But it was an article that showed that in the clean energy field, it was overwhelmingly elderly and male. And people, I've also learned that children, I guess young people, make decisions around 6th grade, as to what they're going to do. And so we need to really show those possibilities early. I have done some presentations to Society of Women Engineers, but I think we need to start even earlier than that. Like kids of all of all ages and types and ethnicities and backgrounds, they need to see faces like their own who can say, I've done it and so can you.
Yeah, I think that's so important. That's such a great point, Lisa. That's something that I definitely advocate for. My undergrad experience in geology was I was pretty much the only woman in my cohort. And it was a small cohort. I only had, 9 or 10 students with me, but still, I was greatly outnumbered, and it is a challenge, I think, for women, in these fields. Still, even today, we're still having to feel like we have to prove ourselves, and sort of, I think we're making a lot of headway. I'm grateful to be at a department like BSU Geosciences, where we have almost half of us are women. So that's awesome for me to see. And part of my outreach sort of initiative is to get younger girls interested in the STEM fields, because I think they're so exciting.
Yeah. And I also want to say that I learned so much from the men that I worked with, being in a mostly male field. I learned a lot of, things that ways in which sometimes the other engineers would approach things differently. And they were very, very focused, where my energy tended to be more diffuse. And so I just want to say, at the same time, I also appreciated very much my wonderful male colleagues. So
absolutely,
this is just about bringing everybody's best to the table.
And I'm sure that applies the other way around too. Like they learn from you as well, and that just plays into how diversity in all fields is important. Having different mindsets and different ideas.
As long as we're open to learning and respect, that's the key.
I love it. Yeah, so important. So Lisa, I want to ask you a little bit about kind of shifting more into some of your climate change science advocacy, and sort of what got you interested, what pulled you in, how did you find out about climate change, or what was the big thing that sort of you had an aha moment with?
Yeah, several. That was a fun story. So in 1975, once again, back when the Earth was cooling, I was getting ready to enter engineering school. And I heard about this thing called the greenhouse effect. And I think it was James Watson, talked about it with Congress. And they were talking about Venus and the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and how it warmed the atmosphere. And they talked about runaway warming. And they talked about the possibility that could happen to the Earth. And I was like, oh my goodness, we've certainly got to do something about this. And then I had also done some research recently on Wikipedia on the history of climate change. And we've actually known about this for 150 years, that certain gases heat up the atmosphere. And, some of those scientists were women. So that was kind of cool. But from my own story, I heard about this and I went, oh my goodness, we better check this out and, make sure we don't send we don't go there with the Earth. And I told my family, and they told me I was crazy. And I was like, I don't think so. I think there's something to look at here. If the world's best atmospheric scientists are concerned, I'm a little concerned. But then I had to put my head down and, work for Hewlett Packard. And no, I had to finish my job, my education. And then popped my head back up. And now the world was dealing with the ozone hole. And by God, the world came together, did, with the Montreal Protocol, and banned CFCs, and, found some substitutes, which we've since discovered accelerate, climate change. They were like 1,000 to now 9,000 times more warming than carbon dioxide. But at the time, it was like, here's an example of the world coming together to solve a global problem. And I was like, we're going to do this. We'll solve the climate change problem too. But all these conferences came and went, and the world really wasn't coming together. And then in 2015, there was the Paris COP21, and where the world finally came together to make some more serious, advances and agreements. And even though we met our pledges, we still would be, way overshooting 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times. But still, it was a huge advance. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do my part. I'm going to cut my carbon footprint at least in half, right? So I started with this deep emotional commitment, which is how a lot of our decisions get made. And then it was like, okay, how do I do that, right? So my go-to is always science. Where's the best science? And so I called the Union of Concerned Scientists and I said, can you give me a guide as to how I calculate my carbon footprint and how I can reduce it? And they said, we've got just the thing. We have a book called Cooler, Smarter. So I ordered the book and I read the book, and it basically explained what constitutes our carbon footprint from the perspective of an individual, right? And then they also helped me find a carbon calculator, which is the Berkeley Cool Climate Calculator. And I've shared the link with you. And the cool thing is then I could baseline my carbon footprint. I could see where my particular sources, how I, what were I could see the categories of how I was contributing through my lifestyle to my carbon footprint. And then the decision was, what's the single most powerful thing that I can afford to do? Because I have no time for these, 100 things you can do for climate change. I believe in the Pareto principle, which is, the idea that 20% makes of the things that you do, makes 80% of the difference. In other words, some things are massively more important than others. So I wanted to find that one thing that was the biggest thing that I could do and do that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And that's a great sort of segue. I just want to go back to the Berkeley Cool Climate link that you shared with us, that we're going to put that on our website. And I've actually done it, and it's a super great tool for figuring out where your carbon footprint is highest and how you rank actually among other residents in your area. And it's super cool. I recommend doing that. And it makes you just very aware of, hey, I could probably, be better at taking my bike to school rather than driving my car, or maybe I don't have my heating as high in the winter, or so there are definitely some doable, I would say, changes that everyone can make in terms of our carbon footprint. But
what I love about the carbon calculator is it not only tells you what your biggest opportunities are in terms of just tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, but it also shows you the cost. So you can, if you're not a person with lots of disposable income, you can say, well, I could put in a thermostat and an automatic thermostat like a Nest, and it knows when I'm away and it turns the heat down or turns it down at night or whatever. I mean, there's always something that a person can do with whatever, with whatever funds they have.
Yeah, that's so valid. That kind of segues into this next question, because, you've made a lot of lifestyle changes and you've made a lot of changes towards that goal. And I just would like to get your opinion. Tell us a little bit more about making those changes, and how easy or difficult was it? And how do you feel like that could apply to other people who are thinking about doing the same thing?
Yeah. Well, I kind of see my life as a series of experiments. It's like business process improvement. You have a goal, you think, you take a look at what might make a difference, you do an experiment, you learn from that, and then you move forward. So actually, one of the first things I did was to buy, I did a couple things. I got a Nest thermostat. And so that paid for itself within, I would say, a year or two, because it turns down the heat at night, and, it's got geofencing. So it knows when I'm away from home, and it says, well, why am I heating the home? No humans here.
Yeah.
So it would turn it down. But the next thing I did was I actually put solar panels on my home. I also did a lot of insulation, fairly inexpensive insulation, but the next big step was putting solar on my home. And 2 years ago, in 2014, I had gotten a bid for solar, and then the Snake River Alliance did a Solarize the Valley, which basically creates a buyer's club. So they went to a couple of solar installers whom they vetted, and they said, if we bring you this much volume, will you cut us a deal? And so it was 40% less expensive, the bid I got in 2016. And I said, let's go for it. And I was the first person, to put solar on my home. And there's been absolutely no maintenance now in the 5.5 years, just zero maintenance. It's just worked. But the other thing I did, and this is absolutely critical because we have to scale up this change. So I had a party and I invited all my neighbors and I said, come on over and see these cool solar panels I put in. And I had food and we chatted and I showed them how it worked. And then I did some interviews with the Idaho Statesman and BSU Radio and just said, here's what I've learned and it's so cool and, check it out. And a bunch of my neighbors, you can walk around the neighborhood now and see a whole bunch of neighbors who've got solar and it's because they saw my solar and they saw, how cool it was. And it kind of was nice that I also got an investment tax credit of 30%. So, I put up 15 panels and after tax, it was like 9,500. And I've easily paid that off because before I did that, my annual heating and electricity bills were about 2,100 a year. And I would say now it's 500 to 700.
Wow.
And then every time one of my appliances comes to end of life, I go to the EPA DOE most efficient appliances on the Energy Star site, and I buy the most energy efficient thing I can find, like an electric heat pump water heater.
Mhm.
So that's cut my gas bill. So anyway, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's Lisa, you are such an inspiration. That's fantastic. And it's not only that you're making these changes for yourself, but you're also just promoting the change, which is, that's great that so many of your neighbors also went in and put up solar panels just based off of the information that you could give them. So
that's the idea. We have to scale it up.
yeah.
So that my MO, my modus operandi is, think about what might make a change, do the science, get the best science, do the experiment, and then learn from that, and then broaden and build, spread the word, figure out how to scale it up. And, after I made all those changes in my own home, and I've sent you a list of those, then it was, well, there are diminishing returns in terms of what I can do with my own home. So the most important thing is to get other people doing these and to make changes at the systemic level, which is really where the majority of the emissions, happen at the
Mhm.
industrial and commercial, levels, and the systemic levels. And so that's where I kind of got into spreading the word and organizing and working with organizations. And then the last step has been looking at my portfolio and using my money to make sure I'm not funding climate change and I'm funding organizations who are working to stem it.
Yeah, that's great. I just want to ask you if you have any opinions on this. So for poor grad students who can't afford solar panels and maybe don't live in a place where they can upgrade some of their thermostats or anything, what are some changes that you think students or people like us could implement that might be really helpful in making
Okay.
that
Well,
percentage?
the kind of the 5 or 6 areas that you can look at are, of course, your domicile, where you live.
Mhm.
So anything you can do, even with any smaller appliances. And then the biggest one in Idaho for most people is transportation. So, riding a bike or taking a bus. The bus is going to run one way or another, whether anybody's on it or not. And you can put your bike on the bus too. The other thing is carpooling, right? And then asking yourself, do I really need to make this trip? So that's transportation. Like, there's actually apps that will say, here's the most efficient way to like do all your errands on one day or something, which also gives you more time and money because you're not wasting fuel. And then there is the way you eat, right? So we've at the latest COP26 in Scotland, there was a huge push to reduce methane. that,
Mm.
you know, if we reduce it 30% by 2030, that's one of the best things we can do to bring global warming down.
Yeah.
And so the way you eat, I got to say, you know, has a huge impact. In fact, I was just looking at a chart from, I believe it's from the Economist, yeah, from the Economist, that shows the carbon or the carbon intensity of different foods. So like, you know, beef and dairy, and surprisingly, rice, because of the methane probably, you know, are difficult things. So I know a lot of young people, you know, try to eat less meat, try to, you know, lower on the carbon and methane scale. So, so that's huge. I mean, just the way you eat and what you eat. And
I
then,
imagine as well that has to do with just exporting those foods as well. So
yes, there's the travel, but one of the interesting things is that really a huge part of the emissions just has to do with the actual agriculture. So, you know, the food that you feed a beef cattle, you know, its whole life, the nitrogen, you know, fertilizers, you know, the NO2, N2O, I'm sorry, I don't have my chemistry right, but the nitrogen in the fertilizers and the crops that you have to, you know, all the acreage it takes to feed an animal for so many years, just to keep its metabolism going. So really, surprisingly, a lot of that, it just comes from all the energy that and the farming that goes into creating that food. And of course, yeah, it's better not to eat kiwis or, you know, things that are getting flown across the ocean, because there's tremendous amount of, I guess that's another thing. There's a tremendous amount of energy that's not accounted for in terms of shipping across oceans. So I try to buy things that are locally made. And then I try to avoid palm oil, because that is associated with deforestation, which we absolutely have got to stop.
Oh, yeah.
And then let's see, then the things you buy, right? So I like to pop some tags at the local, I like to buy things at the thrift store, you know, I'm gonna pop some tags.
add in Macklemore
$20 in my pocket, you know, so I love to shop at, you know, the thrift stores and really think about, you know, the fashion, the money that, and the environmental devastation associated with fast fashion. So those are all the things you buy, you know, including clothing, the food you eat, how you get around, and then anything you can do in your domicile, wherever you live. And I guess the last thing I would say is there is work underfoot to provide, for example, solar for multifamily dwellings and to make multifamily places more energy efficient. And there's a lot of work at BSU and some of the other campuses to help the campus go carbon neutral. So you can be part of that effort.
Yeah, it's great to know. And I know that there's a lot of people working with a lot of farmers in Idaho for carbon sequestration techniques that they use, because the ground takes up so much carbon, and it's an interesting sort of topic.
I am super, super excited about two things in Idaho. Two of our biggest opportunities, I believe, are, well, there's a bunch, but one is agriculture. Agriculture can be, you know, can either help us or hurt us. And if farmers are driving electric tractors and using, you know, fertilizer that's organic and, you know, sequestering carbon through you know, no-till or low-till and cover crops and other practices, that could make a huge difference. And in fact, there's been some legislation to put money in their pockets for doing the right things. And the interesting thing is, at the same time, it makes the soil more impervious to extremes of moisture like drought and flooding. And it improves the tilth of the soil and the health of the soil. So all the way around, you know, it's a good thing to do. So that's a huge opportunity. Another is, you know, to continue Idaho's progress towards clean energy. Idaho's a fantastic place for solar. Wind is good. It's a little better in Wyoming, but it's good here. And we've got all these rooftops, you know, that could hold some solar.
Yeah.
And then battery technology is just really dropping the cost per kilowatt hour of storage. And in fact, Idaho Power is very seriously looking at battery storage now. So there's agriculture, there's our energy system, and the big one, transportation is our biggest carbon footprint. And some years ago, I think it might have been 2018, a number of utilities as well as a number of environmental groups met with the Idaho legislature, the transportation committees for the House and the Senate. It was a joint meeting. And that one fact really stuck out for me. And that was that Idaho sends $3 billion out of state for transportation fuels every year. And that was like 3 or 4 years ago, right? What is it now? What if we didn't send that money out of state? We electrified our vehicles and we generated that energy in state. And one of the coolest things about electric vehicles, and I have a Tesla, is that they're 3 or 4 times more efficient at translating energy into motion. Is that cool? So even if we turned all of those vehicles that are internal combustion engines into electric vehicles, we'd only need, somewhere between 20 and 30% more electricity to charge those. And still that's a major lift, but and think of the health benefits. So I would say transportation, agriculture, and our energy system are 3 really big opportunities for Idaho.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's I mean, there's just so much, and I'm so glad to hear that the state of Idaho is actually, these organizations are working towards cleaner air and reducing carbon. And I mean, it's such a beautiful state, and it just, there are so many beautiful places, and I think we really need to be able to preserve these areas for future generations and for everyone now, just to enjoy these areas, because they're not going to last forever, but we can make them last as long as we possibly can through our own actions and through the actions of these organizations. And so that makes me happy to hear that there's some action being taken.
And that's another little bit of science. When you get into the science of psychology, what I learned in my coaching studies was that it's not like we wait for something to happen and then we feel empowered to do something. It actually works the other way around, that we take some small step and then we say, oh, I have efficacy. I can do things. I have the ability to act, however small. I have choices and I can exercise them and I can make a difference. And so by making those small steps, then it empowers us and encourages us to do more. And so I always encourage people to just take that one small step, whatever it is that you can do.
Yeah. And that goes along with the title of your podcast that we named, is that every little bit helps. Yeah, I know it sounds cliche, but it's very important, and it does make a difference. Speaking of which, if you could just describe your work using an analogy, what analogy do you think you would use?
Let's see, I think I gave you some, but I don't remember. I guess I would just describe it as an experiment, just kind of like that little kid watching the anthills. It's like, well, how does this work? So it's I start with science and I say, I want to make this improvement. What's the improvement I want to make? Okay, I want to lower my carbon footprint, and then I want to, learn from that and scale it up. And I want everything I do to contribute to that. So how do I do it? And then I try an experiment and I say, wow, that worked really well. Or, well, it worked pretty well, but I would do it a little differently next time. And then I would share that. I share my learning. So it's an experiment. And the thing I love about experiments is that sometimes you learn, surprising things that you didn't know. I was amazed at the difference between summer and winter in terms of the amount of solar that panels generate. It's like 4 to 1, summer versus winter. It's significant,
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's a great analogy. I think you also mentioned something you do. Brian will be happy about this. You do some jazz performing. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. So improvisation, right? So yeah, that's a great analogy. So I've always been a singer. And just since I was a little girl, I was in the church choir. And I sing with the what used to be the Hewlett-Packard Jazz Band. We call ourselves Boise Straight Ahead, and we're a big band in kind of the style of the bands in the 40s. We've performed for many years at the Sun Valley Jazz Festival. And the idea of jazz performance, especially with a big band, is there's some improvisation, right? I mean, there's kind of a basic tune and you all kind of know the direction you're taking, but you're listening carefully to each other. Okay, what's the total sound that's coming out here? Do I need to modify this note? Do I need to, be a little quieter so we can hear another member of the band? Do I need to kind of pick up the beat, the rhythm a little bit? So we're all listening carefully with the intent of creating this beautiful thing, this beautiful sound and this wonderful experience. So I think that might serve as a nice analogy or metaphor.
I love it.
And we're using our skills, right? Like I can't play a horn, but I can sing. And so everybody has their own little instrument, right? And that might equate to like your interests or your knowledge or your character strengths, whatever they may be for you. In fact, character strengths are something I use in my coaching. So everybody, literally plays their part. We're listening to each other. We're working together towards the same goal, which is a wonderful experience, not only for the people who are making the music, for those who are listening.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful analogy. I really like that. And just to tie it back in, we've talked a lot about how a lot of our people that we've interviewed are musically inclined, or they're some artistically inclined, and that, that's a form of science as well, and how glaciers really operate as a whole orchestra and volcanoes operate as one big horn. And so it's really fun to have these analogies like relate to other disciplines and how we can visualize just how important our role is in making these changes. So thanks for that. That was beautiful.
This podcast is slowly building up enough members for an entire big band, so we might get a call one day.
We're gonna fill a whole freaking stadium.
Oh yeah.
Lisa can sing for us. We found our singer. So so we're going to move into a little segment that we like to do with our interviewees, where we ask you to sort of describe your work that you do or the changes that you've implemented to 3 sets of different people. And so we do this just to sort of kind of do the elevator pitch, how would you describe what it is that you do? And so the first group that we're going to ask you to just briefly describe what you do is to 4th and 5th grade class, so an elementary class.
5th grader.
Yeah, so I would say, I don't know how specific you want to get, but I think of something I want to do. I learned about the science, about how it really works. I set a goal. I try something. I learn from it. And then I tell all my friends what I learned. And then we have a party.
I think
it has to be fun. It has to be fun, right? I mean, how did Elon Musk sell all those Teslas? He made them sexy.
Right. Right. Yep. We're just naturally inclined towards sexy and fun. So
absolutely. Got to be fun.
Yeah. Great. So the next group of people is maybe a young adult or someone like an undergraduate or someone early career professional who sort of knows some stuff but doesn't know a whole lot.
Undergrad.
Or doesn't have a background in climate change or environmentalism.
And I would just kind of, again, broaden this, when there's something you want to accomplish, get really clear about the problem you want to solve, find the best information sources you can about that problem, and then set a goal that's maybe challenging but realistic. Find all kinds of sources of support. Break it down into small steps, and take those steps and have, be accountable to someone or something. And the other thing I think, to the jazz analogy, let it be something that really involve your heart, let it be something you're really passionate about, something you really care about. And that will go a long way. But that, and have support, the support of scientists, support of others, accountability. And then, when you make each small accomplishment, as you finish those small things, learn from them and celebrate them. It's so important to celebrate, and then share it with your friends and have a party.
The end, always have a party.
Always have a party. Always
celebrate it. I love it.
celebrate.
So the last group is a professional. So maybe at a conference, or maybe at one of a meeting that you have for your alliance or your businesses. How would you promote what it is that you've done?
Expert.
I think in this case, I tend to be working with a lot of business people. And so I think it's really important to understand their values. So pretty much the same approach, but I would say understand the values of the people, the values and the language of the people you're speaking with. Maybe find those points where the things that you're working on and the things that they care about intersect. And using a little bit of coaching, help them to see the benefits to them of doing, the right thing. So for example, I'm working with folks in rural areas to implement fast charging stations through the Volkswagen Dieselgate settlement funds and some of the infrastructure funds that are coming down. One of the things we talk about is the opportunities for the small towns, right? All these people will come to your town because they want that fast charge.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, the EV drivers have range anxiety. So the EV drivers are looking for a place for a fast charge. These folks want to drive traffic literally into their town, and while these folks are charging, they'll get food and drink and buy things. So I would just, change the model slightly to take into account, other people's motivations. But always, think of the Pareto principle. What's going to make the biggest difference? What's the thing I can do that will make the biggest difference? Let's measure it. Let's have measures of our success. Let's actually do a baseline. Let's measure them. Let's think about how we can be most effective in terms of the people we're working with. And then report the results, report the successes, modify the program, and then broaden, as you get more successful, broaden your audience and the people who are participating. So you do small experiments, you learn, and then you broaden those. And then you party, you celebrate. You tell the world what you did. I did this thing and it was so cool. And I put in these panels and they've already paid for themselves, because I save so much energy every year, and they're so cool, and there's no maintenance. And now if I had a battery and the power goes down, I can keep operating, and the house and the whole neighborhood can come party at my house while the power's down. So, of course, they might have to wear masks for the next little while.
COVID friendly partying at this.
But I think that the minor difference there is just, setting the measures, measuring the results, learning, and then understanding your audience and finding the intersection of your interests and what matters to them, and then helping them to see it in terms of their own interest.
Yeah. I think that's so applicable to so many of the things that we do as scientists as well, implementing those small changes, and where can we be the most effective and the most efficient in how we approach our sciences and how we approach the community around.
And one more thing you just reminded me of. The language we use is super important. A lot of scientists don't know how to speak, normal people talk. So for example, if I talk about positive feedback loops, people think, well, that's cool. That's a cool thing. You think I'm cool and I think you're cool. No, that's not what positive feedback is something that's self-reinforcing, but you could also talk about, in terms of runaway global warming, you could talk about a negative spiral, a vicious cycle would probably be a better word for it. So, we need to be able to use language that will be clearly understandable by a non-scientist. So I think that's the other thing is how we communicate.
Yes.
and to the specific audience using their language and their values.
Yes, absolutely. That's such a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. And it's something that we struggle with in terms of how we communicate to a broader audience, but it's something I know definitely that a lot of people are working on at this moment. And it's something even, my advisor, Brian and I actually had the same advisor. So Jeff Johnson, he's really good at, hey, let's how do we communicate this better in a way that isn't so jargony and it doesn't sound so heavy and, but it gets the point across and things like uncertainty, right? That's something that we really need to be able to communicate better because people want answers. They always want answers. And we have to be clear about the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty in some of the stuff that
and a lot of scientists want to be careful not to speak beyond what they know, but like the word theory to a lot of people means, well, I just think maybe it works this way, as opposed to a body of well-validated, experiments that indicate that it's almost certain that, for example, humans are heating the planet. It's like 99.99 whatever percent, so sometimes our carefulness is interpreted to mean tentativeness, that we're really not sure. And we're just being careful and accurate, so I think the way we use language, needs to convey our understanding in a way that non-scientists can understand. There's a wonderful book called I'm Not a Scientist, which also shows how politicians can cherry pick and use other, abuse science. And so we need to be aware of, how science gets misinterpreted and misquoted. So our language and our communication are extremely important in terms of how we make progress.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very valid. I know even just working with volcanoes, there's a lot of misinformation about carbon emissions and global climate. And so I definitely like to have these hard, challenging conversations with individuals when, they pinpoint their favorite YouTube influencer has said something and I, kind of challenge that. I like to challenge them on the ideas.
Well, in fact, there's a whole chapter in the book on how, statements about volcanoes and climate change. Yeah, so you'd enjoy that chapter.
Yeah, great. I know. I really want to get this book. I know you've told me about it before. Oh yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Quick, I actually just recently heard that that recent eruption, the Tonga one, is going to result in a 1 degree change drop for like the next year or so. So because good, but also might fuel some conspiracies and whatnot. So
yeah, it's an interesting topic. So I want to come back a little bit at the end towards some next steps that we can take. But first, I want to kind of just ask you some random silly questions because we like to do this. So I know that you spend a lot of time in your garden and you've really thought about the environment a lot. So what I'd really like to know, Lisa, is what are your thoughts about garden gnomes?
Oh, when I was a little girl, I believed or wanted to believe in fairies. And there's this saying in what is it? Shakespeare. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamed of in your, I forget what it dreamed of in your, I can't remember reality. Basically, the idea is, who knows what isn't out there, but I think I'm more into fairies than gnomes. Okay. I think if a gnome is beautiful, it could hopefully, ward off evil spirits or something. I think art in the garden is good. I like, I've got a little bicycle windmill that I have in my garden, but I'm more into fairies and butterflies. I used to draw pictures of fairies, and I like to believe, that they say the fairies dance when you plant a garden, and so do I. So
that's really
sweet. So I like, being Irish, being part Irish, sure, and I believe in the fairies. They come and help me with me garden. So yeah, I'm more into fairies than gnomes.
Yeah, that's fair. I know there's a lot of like Icelandic sort of traditions or sort of beliefs around things like gnomes and fairies and stuff. And they actually build whole like roads around certain areas because
Ah.
they think that, you know, oh, these rocks contain these beings and we have to protect them. So it's funny. It's
Sure,
really
and there's the wee people, the wee folk. They're the wee folk. Well, you know, in Native American, let's see, spirituality, they see the rocks and the plants as our elders, right? They've been here much longer than we have, and we have the minerals from all those rocks in our bodies. So we're, you know, we're really not separate from them. I mean, you know, this flesh encapsulated little bit of earth with the, you know, we drink the waters of the planet, and the minerals of the planet are in our bones. And so I think having respect for stones is important. I mean, my plants can't grow without minerals.
Yeah. Well, I respect stones for a whole other reason because
Yeah, especially the molten ones.
yeah. Yeah, super awesome. Another silly question, and maybe not so silly, but I'm interested in what your spirit animal is, Lisa.
Oh, it's an owl.
Oh,
There's no question about it. Years ago, I've always been a night owl. And in the Native American tradition, you know, there's a lot of wisdom there, and they see in the dark. And I always feel like I've been very future oriented, that I can kind of see what's around the corner. But I like that they're quiet and they're thoughtful. And I've always been a night owl, and I love the night sky. And I have owls in my backyard that, you know, that hoot to each other. In fact, there was a great horned owl on my basketball hoop in my driveway a couple of months ago. I was like, whoa, there's an omen.
That's perfect, I think, for you.
I see it, definitely.
You have big eyes too, right? They're watching, and they're really watching carefully. And so
They're very observant, they're very wise,
their hearing is excellent. They can hear mice. So I think using our eyes and ears and believing what we see and hear, sometimes for me, being quiet would be a good thing. Listening more than I talk.
Oh, I love it. Okay, well, sort of as a last question, Lisa, to this fantastic interview. It's been so great, and we've learned so much. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the next steps, namely maybe how we use our money or our financial power to sort of support solutions to climate change?
Absolutely. That's the big one. So I was at two banks that I had been at for years, and I won't name their names, but when I discovered that they were funding climate change and, you know, pipelines and especially pipelines that were going through Native American land, that to me was just a complete outrage. And I said, I'm closed, you know, I'm getting out of these banks. And I did. I got out of two banks. I'm now in a credit union. I'm not going to say which one, so nobody hacks my bank account. But you know, but I left them. And then I also years ago went through my portfolio, because yes, I did, you know, manage to save some money. And I went through with something called, let's see, what is it called? It's like fossil free funds or something, fossil fuel free funds, something like that. And I went through and it shows you the percentage of the funds that are invested in fossil fuels. And I said, I'm ditching every single one of these, you know, that has fossil fuels. And when I work with my advisor, financial advisor, you know, I say, you know, no fossil fuels, and let's see if we can find you know, investments in clean energy, investments in sustainable farming. We're still kind of looking for more sustainable ag. But, you know, things that are actually investing in the kinds of, they're putting my money in the kind of world that we want to see. So however much money you have, think about the bank you're in, think about, you know, where you're putting your money, and make that also, that's also a choice. So I'm really excited about that. And all the different companies that have sprung up in terms of ESG, you know, environmental, social, and governance or impact investing is another name for it. Look at where your money goes. Put it in a financial institution that is responsible.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Lisa, this has been an amazing interview. I think you've inspired at least all of our podcast listeners, and hopefully certainly more in the community. And we're just so excited to have people who are sort of team environment and are really rallying behind that. And yeah, we'd just like to thank you for coming on. You've just been such a great guest.
Woohoo! Let's party. Party for STEM.
Do you have anyone that you want to shout out?
Oh, anyone I want to shout out to?
anything.
Ilana Rubel. I love her. She held a conference, the first conference at the State House on climate change and how it's impacting Idaho. She's awesome. There are some farmers I know who are doing sustainable agriculture, and I don't know if I have permission to name their names but they're not public people. But the farmers, and the members of the Idaho CleanTech Alliance, the members of the Idaho Business for the Outdoors, and all the STEM students who are working to create a better world.
Great, well said.
Based on science, not BS.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. It was so great talking to you. And yeah, we're just excited to hear about all the other changes you're going to make. And
next one I'm going to make is I'm looking at updating my space heating to put in a super efficient heat pump that also runs in compressed carbon dioxide. So a cold climate air source heat pump that operates in carbon dioxide. That's my holy grail.
Wow.
Yeah, that is you're just continuing to be an inspiration for everyone. You're so admirable. So thank you, Lisa. And yeah, we hope to have you on more maybe in the future to hear about some of the awesome stuff that's going on with climate change and also just environmental groups in Idaho.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, that was an epic conversation.
We'd like to thank all of our listeners.
Tune in next time for another Epic Earth podcast.